YouTube says it has had enough of vaccine misinformation on its site.
And false stories from phony sites to run circles around major news outlets.
Many people don't know the difference between something real and something created to deceive them.
Open your eyes.
If you've ever had this feeling that something was terribly wrong with the world that we live in, but you couldn't figure out just what it was, then you've come to the right place. Secret societies, mystery religions, and the Illuminati have been controlling our reality since the beginning of time. But not anymore, because there is an awakening happening, and you are about to become a part of it. Wake up, because this is a call for an uprising.
This is a call for an uprising. Welcome to today's show. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking to yourself, do I really need a Dick Van Dyke conspiracy theory in my life? And I know there's an elephant in the room that needs to be addressed, so I might as well address it. I mean, I don't really have anything to lose anymore. These channels aren't monetized. They're not getting new subscribers. And when we see people like Dick Van Dyke live to 100, I think all of us are thinking the same thing. Is he drinking that red juice? Is he getting that red sauce? How is it that all of these people in Hollywood and politics all somehow live to be 100? Whether it's David Rockefeller, George Bush Sr., Henry Kissinger, even the latest Jimmy Carter, who looked like the crypt keeper from Tales from the Crypt walking around at the age of 100. Well, they all live to be 100, not because they work out and they're fit and they have good genes. We all know why they live to be 100, because they live off of the fountain of youth. And of course, we can compare these people to vampires, but we might get into trouble about the origins of vampires and the blood libel and how certain people who pretended to be something they were not, but were from the synagogue of Satan, used to live off of the blood of the young. And we see it mentioned in a lot of shows, as I've exposed over the years, whether it's The Simpsons or television shows about Silicon Valley, that show these big tech guys wanting to live forever and turning to the blood of young children, right? But that's just a theory, of course. But we could break down this theory with Dick Van Dyke right now. And if you want to see any of those videos, they are available on my website at callforanuprising.com, where all of my thousands of videos are archived, and you could see it for yourself. But for those of you that don't know, People Magazine just released an article on Dick Van Dyke turning 100. And what a coincidence that one of the photos that we see of Dick Van Dyke living to 100 is him putting his two hands, doing the 666 sign right over his eyes. Now, I'm sure that's a coincidence, just like it's a coincidence that all these celebrities, whether it's Barack Obama presidents or Pharrell or Lil Wayne or Jay-Z or Beyonce, constantly do this same exact thing where they put both of their hands in a 666 symbol and they put it right up over their eye. Or all the collages that we see of celebrities doing it with one hand right over one eye. I guess Dick Van Dyke was just playing peekaboo, right? He's just an old man and he's trying to be silly and funny. Or, of course, as most of us interpret Dick Van Dyke, creepy and very creepy. Because if you ever seen Dick Van Dyke and his shtick that he does, always being around children, well, when you wake up to everything that's going on in the world and who these people really are, it just makes everything even more creepy and eerie. But all the celebrities do the 666 hand sign. And of course, we're supposed to give a pass to Dick Van Dyke, who somehow is living to 100 and still walking around talking and having books written or co-authoring books about himself. We're supposed to believe it's just normal, while the rest of us would struggle to make it to 60 years old at this point with the chemical baths and everything else that they're putting over our heads or in our food on a daily basis or in our water. Of course, other times we've seen Dick Van Dyke do the 666 hand sign, of course, with the Masonic top hat, doing this deliberately. This is another way that they hide but show you who they are. We see a lot of celebrities do things where they're tipping a hat, making the 666 sign, or holding a part of their shirt and doing it. So we have the obvious signs and symbols right in front of our faces. But people won't believe this because Dick Van Dyke's 100. Dick Van Dyke was around in the early days. It's just like they don't want to believe the Beatles or Elvis. They only want to think it's these pretty clearly openly Satanists like Lady Gaga, who worship the devil, who are indoctrinating children. They've all been around since the advent of Hollywood and the entertainment industry. But these guys back in the day used to play the role of Christian, right? And if you look at it now, you say, well, this stuff's pretty creepy, right? Well, if you were a Satanist and you wanted to be around Christian children, if you understand the bloodline, well, you would realize, oh, it would make sense to portray yourself as a Christian, right? In fact, when you actually research satanic ritual abuse and Satanists, they infiltrate churches so that they can be around Christian children, and people take them at their word because they go, oh, so-and-so's not a Satanist. They showed up at church on Sunday. So-and-so's not a Satanist. He's a priest, right? And then you find out, well, of course, these are all fronts, just like all the stories we've heard over the years about the Catholic Church or stories about Boy Scout leaders, these adult men who just want to hang around other people's kids, right? It's just a coincidence. They're just good people. They're friendly in the neighborhood. They go out of their way to help everyone, right? And that's why Dick Van Dyke has books like Faith, Hope, and Hilarity, where he's giving the children's eye view of religion, and he plays the role of being a Christian. In fact, let's do a little bit more of a deep dive if you understand that red sauce that I've talked about. And if you don't understand that red liquid that's inside your body and why it's harvested and needed, and witches lust for it and crave it, and Satanists do as well, well, again, you should check out my videos on the website on it. But I'll try to give you a rundown here. So even recently, Dick Van Dyke was hanging out with Chris Martin. He was actually in a music video with Coldplay. And of course, Chris Martin, another Illuminati Satanist, right? Look at all these images of him with his all-seeing eye right on his guitar. I broke down his Super Bowl performance before and other performances from Coldplay, even the video with Beyonce and Chris Martin, which was one of the first videos that I ever did back in 2016. Those videos are available on the website. But here's Chris Martin magazine cover doing a Masonic pose, right? The hand over the heart symbol. Here's another Masonic pose pointing to the temple, of course. These are symbols of the Sublime Knights Elected, which is the 11th grade of the Ascent and Accepted Scottish Rite, which Chris Martin is a part of. So you might find it interesting that he's teaming up with Dick Van Dyke. And in the music video, Dick Van Dyke is holding a bunch of red balloons. That's right, he's holding a bunch of red balloons, just random, I'm sure. They said, we're going to get Dick Van Dyke at 100. We're going to put him in a music video. Let's have him hold some balloons. Is it because of Dick Van Dyke's love of clowns? Is it because he loves the clown It? Is that what they're paying homage to? They're like, Dick Van Dyke, what can we do with Dick Van Dyke? Let's have him hold a red balloon, right? Because most people think of the red balloon, and of course those of us who are awake think of child abduction, but most regular people, when they think of the red balloon, think of the movie It, which of course is a movie about a clown who harvests, who scares children to build up, of course, that adrenaline inside their bodies, and then sacrifices those children. And if you read the book It, which they never tell you, the ending actually happens to be about a bunch of children that get it on with one another. And I'll leave it at that. But of course, the clown It was always notorious for carrying around the balloons, and most recently in the remake of the film, the red balloon specifically. And that's what we see with Dick Van Dyke. Now, the red balloon, for people that don't know, is a sign for missing children. The tie-in with the balloons represent an euphoric float. Okay, a high that happens when these children end up being sacrificed in these specific rituals. The red balloon symbolizes the euphoric float that these people get, the high that they get from that red liquid. And the red, of course, symbolizes the blood. And we've seen it depicted many times over, not just in It, not just Van Dyke doing it. We've seen Kanye West and Kim Kardashian recently with their daughter, if you want to call it a daughter, North, being exposed, walking around with the red balloon in her first magazine shoot, because it's normal for 5-year-olds to have magazine shoots, right? And right in the magazine shoot, not only the red balloon, but doing the all-seeing eye symbolism. In most films that depict children going missing or being abducted, there's always red balloon symbology surrounding them. This goes back to even before the film It. Now, what else is interesting about that is that Dick Van Dyke's most known film is Mary Poppins. We've all heard of Mary Poppins, right? And you might remember Mary Poppins flew around in the original Disney movie carrying an umbrella, right? Mary Poppins, the witch who would just show up and, create all sorts of magic, right? That's the plot of the film. In London, a magical, no-nonsense nanny named Mary Poppins arrives at the Banks family home in Cherry Tree Lane, right? so that she could have fun and do some magic with the children. That shouldn't surprise anybody since Disney itself is based off of magic. But this isn't something created by Disney. The books that were actually written about Mary Poppins and then were adapted by Disney in the original film in 1965. In the books, they're not using umbrellas. They're using balloons. And Mary Poppins is using red balloons. And if you look at early adaptations and illustrations from books on Mary Poppins, you'll see that there aren't umbrellas being used. There's actually balloons being used. And in the most recent film, the remake that they made, they did in fact go back to using balloons as well as using the umbrella. So you have a tie-in with Mary Poppins and the balloons. You have a tie-in with Dick Van Dyke and the balloons, and we know what the balloons actually represent. Another thing to look at is the character Bert that he plays in Mary Poppins, because if you pay close attention to the character Bert, especially in the world in 2025, you'll be pretty creeped out, because you know what Bert does? Bert goes around hopping down kids' chimneys and leading them across rooftops and bringing them on magical, mystical adventures. And there's really hidden metaphors in it for grooming if you pay attention to it. Because in today's world, we would look at this type of behavior with adults and children and say, well, that's really sick. But people who have grown up on a lot of these Disney films, they look back and they go, no, that's what they were doing then. Maybe now, everybody's so sick now. No, they've always been showing us this stuff in front of us. And, you know, you could look at the character Bert, who is taking the children on these euphoric flights, and he's chalking pictures for the kids in the movie, and he's singing songs, and he's teaching them all sorts of songs, and clearly just grooming the children in Mary Poppins. Now, people believe that's a conspiracy theory, but if you look back at the origins of Mary Poppins and you look at how it was really balloons instead of umbrellas, and then in the remake they actually brought balloons back, well, and you pay attention to how Bert the chimney sweeper actually behaves and goes down kids' chimneys kind of like Satan Claus does, and then brings children on the rooftops, and then those children get euphoric highs and start flying around. Well, you just say to yourself, yeah, somebody wasn't just on acid when they wrote Mary Poppins. Because if you look at these stories, you would think to yourself, who would ever write this? And why was this ever popular? Well, mind control. There wasn't a lot of movies in 1965. There wasn't a lot of stuff that was getting put out and shoved down people's throats like there is now. There's there's so many movies. Everywhere you turn, there's a streaming platform. There's trillions of movies, horrible movies, obviously, in this day and age. But back then, everybody knew Mary Poppins. Every parent showed their kids Mary Poppins, took them to the movies, right? And that's a part of spellcasting. And right in front of your face, you don't even realize that Mary Poppins is a witch. Just like Mary Poppins is a nice nanny who somehow has the ability to fly, right? And who else has the ability to fly when we think back on, history when it comes to levitation? And, you could think of movies about any witch in any movie and they levitate, right? Or they fly away on a broom. So that's pretty interesting, right? And then, of course, Dick Van Dyke is known for the Dick Van Dyke Show, which featured Mary Tyler Moore. And if you don't remember Mary Tyler Moore is another actress who was famous back in the day. And here's a picture of Mary, who is doing one of those, one of those like late night shows where they sing and they dance. Somehow people watch this crap. There's Mary right on the screen. Look at this guy. What's on his chest? It's 666. Is that a leprechaun with the 666 on his chest? Yeah, well, they didn't expect people to notice 666, especially back then. Now more people preach about the Book of Revelation than they did back in the 1950s and 60s, where it was more of the cookie cutter type world. More people have become awake to the horror story that we're actually living in now, so they're aware of what 666 is. And if you actually paid attention to the Dick Van Dyke Show, many times in the show, there are episodes that relate to secret societies, secret rituals, secret handshakes. I wonder what he was actually referencing. And another thing to note that's important if we're going to stay on the concept here, not of just the 666 hand sign that we saw earlier with Dick Van Dyke, but the fact that he's alive at 100, the red balloons that they recently showed and deliberately did in that video of him with Coldplay and Chris Martin. How about, in addition to the Mary Poppins tie, how about we look at this tie-in with the rabbit, the bunny, right? Because a lot of times on his show, there would be themes of the bunny. Now, I didn't know, what are we talking about, Easter? I mean, is anybody ever wondering the correlation between Ishtar and Easter and what in the world has to do with the resurrection of Jesus Christ? No, they're not. They just see these things. They don't realize they're under hypnosis. But Mary Tyler Moore wearing the rabbit ears, right? Over and over on the show. They had the child dressed up as the bunny rabbit. They have Dick Van Dyke himself, who, again, these celebrities go out of their way to pose with bunny rabbits or to wear bunny ears deliberately because they know that the people out there are too dumbed down to know what it means. But if you know of everything I'm discussing here when it comes to that red sauce, okay, everything I'm discussing, if you know the actual chemical diagram for that red liquid, that red sauce that they live off of, well, that's where the depiction of rabbit ears comes from. Because you could see clearly what it looks like, right? This is the chemical compound for it. And doesn't it look like two rabbit ears? And if you think that that's crazy, well, why don't we just look at some of these articles? Everyone's wearing rabbit ears. Nobody's going, why? Macaulay Culkin, one of the clear victims of this, but now a clear groomer who has his own band, Underground Pizza, right? Name, I mean, that's not obvious enough when he names his band about pizza. He has his own podcast called Bunny Ears. In fact, he always is out and has been out in public wearing rabbit ears on talk shows, going to clubs. You can even see him here. He looks like he just had himself a little bit of a snack on his lip, right? Wearing the rabbit ears. I talked about Val Kilmer when he passed, all the weird pictures of Val Kilmer with the rabbit ears and what might have really happened to Val Kilmer in regards to that sauce. We Katy Perry at parties, not Easter, like going to Coachella wearing rabbit ears, Lady Vomit Bag going to the club, going out to dinner wearing rabbit ears, right? It's not Easter. Rihanna posing in her apartment wearing rabbit ears. Kim Kardashian wearing rabbit ears. I mean, I'm confused, right? Are you? Did anybody ever see a rabbit in your yard and go, right? Any guy out there, you ever get excuse my language, you ever get a boner and you see a rabbit? I mean, these people do, like very likely. But where does this tie-in come from with women, sex symbols, and rabbits, right? Well, there's no such thing. It's just make-believe because what they're really referencing, of course, is the red sauce. But they always, right in front of you, wear rabbit ears and get away with it. Madonna, well-known Satanist, right? Beyonce, well-known Satanist. We've even seen Betty White, who lived to be 100, another one to mention who lived to be, 100 years old, along with all those other Satanists I mentioned earlier. We've seen the Hilton clan, right? Paris Hilton doing it. I've talked about this clown. I can't even think of his name off the top of my head. I actually had to pause the video right there, which I never do. I just ran. Channing Tatum, who's got I'm sure it's Quincy, he's got the rabbit on his pinky finger there, doing devil horns with his hand, or he's posing wearing rabbit ears at a party or a wedding, right? Yeah, these are all coincidences. They're just obsessed with rabbits. Right? Maybe they're all fans of Playboy, right? I'm sure it's a coincidence, too, that Playboy's logo happened to be about, a rabbit. It was a rabbit, right? Everybody knows that. Playboy, bunny ears, right? Is that why all the girls wear it? Because they're paying homage to Hugh Hefner, right? I mean, Hugh Hefner was a government asset for anyone out there that doesn't know. Direct linkage to the CIA. Because, of course, that's all that Playboy was. I mean, Playboy was trafficking children. Everybody out there should know that by now. Do you think someone came up with the idea and said, hey, wouldn't we make money if we put nude women in a magazine and sold it? Yeah, you probably would. You probably wouldn't have been allowed to do it. Oh, Hugh Hefner was just allowed to do it, right? It was a front for trafficking. And of course, more people found out about that when they started researching the stuff involving Diddy, because Hefner's mansion had underground tunnels that led to the homes of many of Hollywood's elite. You could even see the blueprint in the underground tunnels under the Playboy Mansion. When Hugh Hefner would go into Vietnam with his Playboy bunnies and bring all these young children back to America. And everyone go, oh, what a hero. He's saving these Vietnamese kids, right? And no one ever hear from these Vietnamese kids again. They go, oh, yeah, we found him a home. Oh, great. That's all we need to know. Yeah, they found him a home, all right. Found him a home, probably, likely. I mean, we all know the end game for these people when it comes to these rituals, but we don't need to go into detail on that. But that's how they operate. Right? They pretend to be philanthropists. They pretend to care about kids. They have business fronts like Playboy. Nobody questions how Playboy, oh, he just came up with this wonderful idea. We're going to put nude women in a magazine. That's it. You become a billionaire, right? And they have all these women walking around nude. And of course, then everyone thinks that Hugh Hefner's just into these women, right? It was a front. The tunnels underground were for children to be moved. The Playboy bunnies served a purpose. They were assets to him for grooming purposes, right? Even Tori Spelling, I covered this recently. When I went into detail about this video is available on the website as well, where, there's Tori Spelling doing the all-seeing eye symbolism, right? Or Tori Spelling, the Spelling family who made a lot of famous shows in Hollywood, right? They had a direct tunnel. It even talks about it in an interview, direct tunnel to the Playboy Mansion underneath their home. So I'm sure it's a coincidence that Dick Van Dyke. He just on Easter, Dick Van Dyke, who creepily has like this is a creepy aura and image around it if you listen to interviews and watch his like comedy, which look, comedy sucks these days too. But the comedy and stuff like with around the kids, so you just look at it and go, wow, it's just really, really creepy. But he just wanted to go, he's so famous at 100 where like none of these kids would have a clue who Dick Van Dyke is. He's going to these events where, kids are dressed up as rabbits. He's making sure he's getting photographs with them. Even a little short, a little video film that he did with Roger Rabbit from Disney fame, right? Who Framed Roger Rabbit? And of course, conveniently, look at him in this screenshot doing the triangle of power with his hands right there, right? The other Illuminati hand symbol. So I just wanted to cover this because again, it's not really an elephant in the room for any people who've been subbed to me over the years. When we see these people living to 100, and they're perfectly fine, whether, Jimmy Carter is out there at 100, Kissinger, Rockefeller, Rothschild, right? And I don't even think these guys kick the bucket when they tell you they're leaving at 100. I think they just go off, off the face of the earth. I just think a lot of them are still roaming the earth, unfortunately. But when you see him doing that, and they have to give you that image of him doing that over his eyes, like he didn't go, hey, I have a really fun, it's going to be so funny. Like, who looked at that picture and was like, Dick Van Dyke, so silly at 100. What's so funny about that in general? Why are all the celebrities doing it? It's so funny to put the A-OK sign over your eyes. Huh? Nobody on earth would ever find it funny, but nobody on earth thinks. Nobody goes, is he communicating like a gang? Because these people are in a gang, secret societies, right? Which he references in his show all the time. They communicate. Yeah, they are. That's a 666 hand sign. That's why you see all the celebrities and all the collages doing it. And he wanted to do it for his 100th big birthday for People magazine. And all the sheeple out there in the comments, underneath the People articles, whether it's Instagram or videos or interviews. Oh, Dick, he's so funny. What a wholesome guy. They don't make him like Dick Van Dyke. If people only knew, right? If people only knew what these people did in secret, it is so clear and so obvious. I'm sure the red balloon thing with Coldplay, I'm sure it's just a coincidence, right? What's the backstory on it? What's the backstory? You're going to say, well, the balloons were to reference Mary Poppins. Well, the movie, it was the umbrella. You want to say, oh, Chris Martin's a big fan of the book. All right, well, why is it a red balloon? All right, well, Mary Poppins had a red balloon. Oh, okay, referencing it, the red balloon. We can go into the theory. Not a theory. We can go into what Mary Poppins really is, which is a witch, and all the creepy undertones of grooming in those Disney films from the 50s, like Mary Poppins, where these adults are just hanging around kids doing magic when they're telling you, it's fun, let's do magic. And the kids are floating around, levitating like witches do, right? Yeah, I'm sure. And he loves rabbits too, just like the rest of them. Give me another break. So happy 100th birthday, Dick. Hope it was a good one for you. I'm sure you got plenty of fall harvesting. Plenty of tomato sauce. I'm sure people brought over to your home because you like a good pasta party, right? Maybe Macaulay stopped by. I can almost guarantee it, folks. I thank everybody for being here. Hope you're all doing well. God bless you and your families as always.